And welcome to Book Talk. I'm Stephen Usery, and we're so happy to be joined today by Kimberla, Lawson, Roby. Thanks so much for stopping by, Kimberla.
Thank you for having me.
Do you ever get people trip on your name with the
yeah, the
Kimberla
Lawson, yes. And there's a story with everything. People would tell my mom, you were so creative with her name. And she's like, I wasn't creative. It's a typo on her birth certificate. and that's the truth. But
were you supposed to be Kimberly?
Yes, or? I was. And so, my brothers are Willie and Michael. So that tells you she's pretty basic when she named us. But when I was getting ready to graduate from high school, go to college, she said, well, we'll go and get your records changed, so that it's correct. And I was like, well, it's different. I think I'll keep it. People call me Kim anyway. And so that's kind of my little story about my first name.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Kimberla Lawson Roby, as we know her, is a New York Times bestselling author, having published 14 novels. Among them are Here and Now, One in a Million, and of course 8 books in the Reverend Curtis Black series. And the latest of those 2 have been focused on his daughter, Alicia. The newest one is Be Careful What You Pray For, and it's published by William Morrow. Now, Kimberla, for those who haven't met Reverend Black, can you bring us up to speed on this deeply flawed man of God?
It's very, very flawed. Well, the Reverend Curtis Black is this man who stands in the pulpit, at least when the series starts out. He's standing in the pulpit. He's basically telling people to do as I say, but not as I do, because he is consumed with money, power, and lots of women. And so he has lots of issues. And he goes from wife 1 to wife 2 to wife 3. He's ousted from the first church that he has in the city of Chicago for so many different reasons. And then he just moves on in a few years to another one. And then finally, when he's ousted from the second one, he decides, I'll never go to another church again. I will found my own church so that I can never, ever be kicked out again. And so that's where he is today. And so now he is this world-renowned pastor making multi-millions of dollars, is just known by everyone and, interestingly enough, loved by everyone. And so his life has sort of taken all kinds of different directions, good and the bad. And now his daughter, who, when the series started, was 5 years old, is now an adult. She's graduated from college, already divorced from her first husband because he didn't earn enough money, meaning he didn't earn the kind of money she was used to her father making. And so now she believes in this book that she finally has everything. She has what she's prayed for: a very wealthy husband, a very gorgeous man, somebody who's extremely charismatic, and life just couldn't be better. What she doesn't know is that Pastor J.T. Valentine, this new husband of hers, is worse than her father was in his terrible years.
Now, I never really did get a good sense of what type of ministry that J.T. Valentine was running. Did you have an idea of what his message was other than his own personal charisma?
That's the thing. Well, his message was always the message coming from the Bible. So he's very clear on that. He knows the Bible very well, and, he can quote the scriptures, and he can speak a great sermon. It's just what he does behind the scenes that nobody is really aware of. And that's why he does have 5,000 members. That's why they love him, because they just don't have a clue, who this person is outside of the church doors.
Now, since I didn't really get to hear him speak, except like once in the book, he gets to have a little bit of a sermon.
Yes.
I always envision him as one of those prosperity gospel types.
So it is, what you can do if you give money. He kind of thinks that when he encourages people to give a certain amount of money, they're going to be blessed, of course, by doing that. And that's really what his message is. And his goal is to earn as much money as he possibly can. And why Alicia was so attracted to him. He was attracted to her because of who her father is and because of how he believes that will benefit him in terms of being Curtis Black's son-in-law.
Now, Alicia has a shopping problem.
Yes.
She has a bad one.
Yes.
And in the book prior, it ruined her marriage.
It did. It really did. She grew up with everything, and the idea of being in college, even spending money at Neiman's and Saks and all of the top stores that anybody could think of in this country, and having her father pay her credit card bills off, well, that's what she was used to. And so the idea of giving up that, she believes she deserves to live a certain way. Curtis Black is, after all, her father. People expect her to look a certain way, and so she wants that tradition to continue with whoever she marries.
Couldn't her mom kind of set her straight while she was growing up? Where was her mom in all this?
Well, her mom has tried, and she even continues to try now. And Alicia actually, takes an attitude with her mom. She has problems with it. You don't tell me what to do, and you don't understand, and, you don't really get me. And so she really gravitates more to her dad because of that.
Now, even though she has a rich husband with JT, she has started to go off shopping just a little bit and pursue her writing a bit more.
Yes.
So how's her writing going?
Yes, that's going very well for her, and still the idea that she'll eventually have a certain income from her writing, and she's hoping for that. But yeah, the shopping has really waned. But I think it's more so because she can do it now. She can do as much of it as she wants to. JT encourages her to take care of herself, spend money on herself. So it's probably not the priority in her life right now. So she thinks she's just in this happy marriage. That's really what her focus is.
And it kind of shows her naivete to think that she'll be the one that does get the huge contract.
Yes. And she does, because in the book world, and I'm taking outside of the book, but looking at the real world as a writer, having started out, I received tons of rejection letters from agents right away. The same thing from editors when I sent the manuscript directly to the publishing houses. But, she's very confident in herself. Her father certainly has raised her up to believe that she can do anything and that anything is possible. And I think you see that pretty clearly in the book.
Because your literary beginnings are very different from hers.
Yes.
You started off self-published, moving books, and got recognized finally by the mainstream people and got you going.
Yes. And so that's the difference. So I wanted to show it. It's like, and you do have those very few people, it's very rare, but people who do have the overnight success, they will get an agent right away, and it won't take very long before the agent is able to sell it to a publishing house, somebody who's ready to acquire right now. But for the most part, it's a very hard, very long, tough road, and it's something that you have to work at in order to find some success with.
And she does have some reservations beginning trading on her father's name, at least.
Yes, she does. She wants to really find recognition with her writing on her own, and not because she's the Reverend Curtis Black's daughter. But, her agent makes it very known that we can really turn things around and make things happen for you. The publishing house will be glad to know that this is who your father is. They'll use his name to publicize you. You'll get more publicity interviews than you'd ever be able to do on your own. And finally, she gives in and says okay to that, because she knows this is going to be good for business.
Now, JT has a huge church, 5,000 members, as you say. And of course, he can't be the only pastor there. He has to have a couple of associate pastors.
Yes.
And we get to meet a couple of them, and they're Weaver and Payne.
Yes.
And two men haven't been any more dissimilar, I think, in the pages of the
Not
book.
at all. Not at all. And I think you find that in general congregations. Having been raised in the church, still a member of the same church that I've been a member of my entire life, I've seen that you have deacons and trustees who have this sort of personality, who are really on the straight and narrow. They really want to do the right thing. They want to do right by the congregation. They just want to do right by people in general. And then you have the ones who are not so great people, and they're up to something all the time, or maybe there's some sort of scheme or something going on behind closed doors, and maybe they support that pastor who is caught up in the scandals and the corruption. And so that's really why I wanted to show two sides of it. You can have a really good person, you can have a really bad person, but even with Weaver, eventually some things come to pass with him that make you kind of think twice about him as well.
But Payne is definitely a puppy.
Yes.
Meaning he's a dog in training.
Yes, he is. There's no doubt about it. And JT is a wonderful teacher and sees him, what a great person to have. I'm going to show him the right way to go and the way to do things. And so he looks up to JT. And you find that that is the unfortunate thing in real life throughout the country. In many congregations, you may have a really young minister who comes in, really is a good person, wants to do the right thing. But if this is the person who they're coming up under, sometimes that changes.
Now, we can criticize a pastor who takes advantage of his flock and commits adultery with his members.
Yes.
But I think a lot of the blame has to fall on the women's shoulders,
yes,
too.
And they do, because you find women who, and I've seen this in my own church, and I'm very honest about it. I say it when I'm at home in my own city, and that is, some women want a pastor, they want a pastor, they want one. They don't care if he's married. It's almost like, some women who go after politicians. It's the power. It's not so much that he's a pastor, but it's the power that he has. And so, yes, they have to take some of the blame as well.
Now, you get to tour a lot for your books. And I've thought, since your books usually come out in January, it's an excuse to get out of Chicago in January.
It is, but you're not very warm in Memphis here today either.
It's not too bad. It's a lot better than it was a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
And, but in traveling around, can you see differences in the way churches run, or are they pretty much one is just like another?
They are pretty much the same. And what I have found is it doesn't matter if it's a small storefront sort of church, if it's a mid-sized church, or if it's a mega church, one that has thousands. It's the same. Doesn't matter if it's whatever denomination, doesn't matter what racial, ethnic background dominates the congregation. You just find that it depends on who you're dealing with, who that actual pastor is.
Now, one of the dalliances that JT has, he has a patron.
Yes.
That's Diana Redding. And she's a cougar as well, and she's got lots of money to spend on it.
Yes, she does. And so JT, is obviously with her in ways he shouldn't be as a married man, but he does what he needs to do because he needs those hundreds of thousands of dollars that she's willing to donate. On his behalf and to help him move to a higher level, because his goal is to be known nationally and then worldwide, and she's willing to do that. She's willing to help him get there.
Now, before Alicia and JT were married, JT was married once before. He was a widower. His wife passed away.
Yes, Michelle. And so he loved Michelle. There's no doubt about that. But she passes away. But there's rumors about her death and, whether JT may have had something to do with that or not. And so that kind of, raises some questions in Alicia's mind when she does start to hear about that.
Now, I have to say, a lot of the characters in the book are very frustrating. You can see them making mistakes, and you say, please stop.
Yes.
How do you deal with it when you're writing these people and you just want to start shaking them?
Right, and you do. Well, it doesn't bother me so much, I guess, as the writer, because I see and meet too many people who are exactly like that. And, I think it's more people like that than you
awful
realize.
for you that you see that many types of people.
Yes, and so, it's unfortunate. Well, I think you probably do too. You just don't know that those people are that way. I mean, that's what I think I find. I just end up talking to people and listening to them, or you'll hear something, or you meet somebody who knows somebody like that. And so I think that's why I see and hear it more so than just the average everyday person. But for the most part, that does happen. Doesn't frustrate me so much either, I guess, because my readers know who these people are as well. I mean, that's what my career has been built on, is readers saying, we know who the Reverend Curtis Black is. We know who these women are. They were asking for more of it after the first book came out. So that kind of tells you how widespread people like this actually exist throughout the country.
Now, in her public role as the First Lady of the New Life Christian Center, Alicia is very public. She's in the public eye. 5,000 people looking at her every Sunday, and the extended congregation and the online presence.
Yes.
And JT trying to grow the ministry. But this brings a couple people from her past back into contact with her as well.
Yes, it does. And, that I won't give away to anyone who hasn't read the book, but it's a huge surprise and, one that JT is certainly not happy about.
Now, I have to say that in the book, people say they love each other. And they say they love each other, but I really don't see anyone doing anything that should actually earn the love of another person.
And that is, but once again, I mean, that's what you see in real life. People sometimes have, these other agendas, why they're with a certain person. In this case, Alicia wanted JT at first because he was wealthy. He had status, and she thought she could be okay financially. JT wants her because he thinks her father can benefit his career in some sort of way. But JT eventually realizes, that he does love Alicia, and actually he's surprised about it.
But
That's not what he planned
why does
on.
he love her?
He loves her just because, I guess, the reason any man loves, why does anybody love anybody? I guess that's my question, that I ask people. But he does. You can still love someone and still be a terrible person, I always say, and I think that's what you find in Be Careful What You Pray For.
Because she did have, I think, one redeeming scene in the book, a series of events. But other than that, I mean, she tried my patience very much through the book.
Oh, I'm sure. And that was kind of the point. It wouldn't even be probably a character. And as I said, for my readers, having done it, for so many years, if it's not someone, it seems that they can love to hate, they're not that happy. They're not really calling it a page turner. And so, those are the characters that I really love to create because they are extremely real. There's nothing made up about them. And that's what I think I like the most.
And there's also more confusion with words and what they mean. A couple of female characters talk about men respecting women. And it's so ironic that both of these women had men lead them into adulterous relationships.
Yep, and that's it. Well, this is what they want. They do want men who respect them.
But that's not respect.
They don't have it. I'm saying what they want.
Yeah.
They do want that. They just didn't end up with that, is what the case is.
Well, there's one point where she was looking back at her relationship with Levi, who was a drug dealer in the last book, and said, oh, he respected me so much. Well, you don't respect a woman by dragging her into that kind of life.
Right. But he respected her as a woman. It depends on how you look at it.
That's not respect in my book.
Well, it's a matter of opinion. It's a matter of opinion, and depending on how you look at it. He was not the person she ever should have been with. She never should have committed adultery with him. On her husband, certainly we know all of that, but the way he treated her, that respect, I don't think she means respect, oh my God, he took me into this criminal situation and, I could have actually gone to jail. I don't think she's thinking on that level. She's thinking how a man treats a woman when he meets her, when he takes her out, the things that he does to her, the way he speaks to her. She's not thinking, I think, as far as you're taking it.
That's because she's a little on the short term.
And she's young. She's very, very young. You think about somebody who has only been out of college for the last couple of years, and, she has a long way to go, the same as any other, person who grows. By the time you're in your 40s, you hope that you're much better than that. I think many of us may have thought differently at 18, 20, 22. We would never think that way in our 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Well, especially when her marriage with Philip ended, and she said she got married too soon, that she didn't know how he was going to be, that he was going to be more thrifty than she was. That she goes ahead and jumps right back into the marriage.
She does. Has not learned her lesson. Has not learned it. Maybe now at the end of this book a little bit, but she still has growing to do, if you ask me. And when I ended that story, I still feel like she has a long way to go to really come full circle.
Do you think we ought to raise the marriage age to 25?
I think you just really, well, it starts at home, though, because a lot of the reason that Alicia is the way she is because she had a terrible father. I mean, she's learned a lot of bad habits from him, and so I think it has a lot to do with how you're raised up. I mean, for me, I grew up in a household where I knew just from listening to my mom and seeing my grandparents that, you get married, you find the right person, you do that, you stay faithful to that person, you live with them until death. So I didn't have to be real old to understand that I wanted that day one right out of the gate. But if you don't grow up with that kind of an upbringing, you probably aren't going to be the person to follow that sort of path.
When your mom reads your books, does she goes, I know she didn't learn that at home?
Yeah, no, not at all. Well, my mom, actually, she's deceased, and, so, and that's fine. But she was very well aware of, Casting the First Stone, which third book, but it was the first in this series. But she fully understood it because of what happens, with so many other people around us.
Now, your 14 books published into your career, and come in very short order since 97, I think, when your first book came out.
Yes.
Do you ever have to deal with writer's block and figure out what these folks are going to be doing next?
No, not really. I think that's been probably the biggest blessing for me, because so many writers will say, had to walk away from it for a few days or even a week, and sometimes even longer than that. For me, it just comes, and I just think now, especially with the series of characters, I know them so well. Their lives just continue on the same as anybody. So if it's 2010. We'll have things happen in our own real lives, all of us, everyone sitting in the room, and the characters will as well. Next year, it may be something totally different, and so that's just kind of how I lead it.
But how can folks live with that much drama in their lives?
They do.
They just get worn out.
Yeah, they actually do. And so as I said, it's relatable. And if you were to go to, Facebook, if you look at any of the reviews that you see online, or even if you just ask some of my readers, they're going to always tell you, I know who these people are. And I may not have ever met them. And so that just kind of tells you again that, for me to live in Illinois and someone in California or here in Memphis tell me that they know these people, it's very, very common. And it's unfortunate, but it's very, very common.
Well, in your own church, and when the books come out, do they start looking at each other and trying to guess who's
trying
who?
To figure out, in the city period, I would say, are you talking about this pastor? I remember when he was here and this was what was going on. So they're always trying to figure that out. But, it's not any one individual. Curtis is a compilation of many ministers, some that I've known throughout the years growing up, some as an adult, some that I've just even heard about and never met before. So it would never be one particular person or one specific or exact situation.
Now, over the past few years, you've also put out a book not in the series in the summer or early fall.
Yes.
Are you going to keep up that breakneck pace and put out 2 books a year or so?
And that's kind of my goal. I won't do that this year because I decided not to do a second one last year for 2010 for the summer. But I would like to do that. And I actually am contracted to do that for 2011 and 2012. So with the novellas, it allows me to write something totally opposite of what the series is. I write the series because I do get enjoyment from it, and because that's what my readers ask for all the time. And so, my responsibility is not even to myself, it really is to them. And so the novellas, those are things that I really think, wow, this hasn't really been touched on a lot. It's an important issue. It may be a taboo or controversial subject, but one that I really want to write about and hope people will get something from. And so that's what those are for.
So what kind of topic outside the Curtis Black series do you want to take a look at next?
I'm kind of really sitting and thinking about it, and I just really haven't thought that far ahead. And, it's like a year and a half before I have to really start paying a lot of attention to. But it'll be something a little more on the serious side. For example, A Deep Dark Secret, the novella that just came out last fall, was about childhood sexual molestation. And so it's told in the voice of a 12-year-old who, straight A student, perfect child, lives a great life, has what people believe, the best stepfather. They just don't realize what he's doing to her. This is a man who is loved by everyone, his co-workers, his family. He's a deacon in the church everybody loves. And so, I want to stick to those kinds of issues, ones that people are either afraid to talk about or very uncomfortable talking about, but ones that we really, really need to focus on.
Do you think authors have a responsibility beyond entertainment
I do.
to address these
I do.
issues?
And so that's why I like to do both. I think with the Curtis Black series, definitely people can relate to it, but it is entertainment, in many, many ways. With a book like A Deep Dark Secret, that's on a whole totally different level.
In approaching the series, do you have a different writing process? Do you have to change maybe where you sit down to write, how you're thinking about things in order to get in those different places?
Yeah. No, it's pretty much the same. I just kind of tackle each storyline, individually, and it's totally separate from the others. But the way I do it, as in figuring out what topic I want to focus on, creating the characters that will be in the story, and then outlining the chapters, then getting ready to start writing the actual chapters, that process never changes.
So what is your daily writing process like?
Well, once I have finished the outline and I'm ready to go, then I'll start writing the first draft. And so I will sometimes start at 9, 10 in the morning, go all the way to 7, 8, 9 at night. Maybe a break to get something to eat, maybe another break to get a snack or something. But I like to write my first drafts every single day as much as I can without missing a day until I finish it. So once I do that, then I start the rewrites and the edits, and then it's usually ready for me to submit to my editor.
So do you write at home in an office? Or?
I do. I have a home office, so I'll do that. Every now and then I'll take the laptop, a little more regularly actually. Now I'll take the laptop to another room in the house. We have a den upstairs, so I'll do that. And then what I have been doing, like the last maybe 3 years, at least 1 week for every book that I'm writing, I'll go away and just lock myself away at a hotel, not, maybe about an hour from home, just so that I have no distractions as I'm really getting started with it.
When you first started the series, did you have any idea that Curtis Black would capture so many people's fancy and would go for such a long time?
Never, ever. And so for me, I never, ever wanted to write sequels. So the first book, the second, and then with the first Curtis Black book being the third, that's still how I felt. But then I started getting all of the response from my readers saying, are you going to write any more about him? What is the Reverend Curtis Black up to? And I'd be thinking, well, he's not up to anything, because to me, it was really over and done with. And so I kind of ignored it. So then I wrote another book, It's a Thin Line. And then I wrote another book, A Taste of Reality. And the messages continued to pour in about it. 2 years later, people were still asking about it. Then my agent and the publishing house, they started getting comments from readers. And so my agent said, people can really relate to this. She actually asked a group of women that she overheard talking in a dental office. She thought they were talking about this terrible pastor in the city of New York, but they were talking about the book. And so she said, you have a responsibility to them, so you should consider it. And so that's how I continued with it. And it has just proven to be more than I ever imagined. People, if they don't know who Kimberla Lawson Roby is, they always know who the Reverend Curtis Black is. And I think that's more interesting than anything.
Have you ever happened upon a situation, overheard someone told you something, you go, that's too awful, even to have one of my characters do? And
I have. And I do tell people, there's many times that you can be sure that I'm not writing real situations, the exact situations that happen to people, because Curtis is meek and mild compared to some of the things I could write about if I were to do that.
So what can we expect? January, another one on Alicia, or?
Yes, actually back to Curtis. Curtis and his current wife. So it's called Love, Honor, and Betray. And then, as I said, I'll be figuring out which novella, which I'll be writing this summer.
So He cheated on Charlotte. What do you think was different about Charlotte that let her stick around and put up with his hijinks more than
Charlotte, unlike the first two wives who were just these really wonderful women and loved their husband, would have been faithful to him until the end. Charlotte is Curtis's match. She's every bit of who he is. And so, they're sort of tit for tat. And so now Curtis has really turned his life around in a number of ways. He's really a good guy by a lot of my readers' standards. But Charlotte is the one that they're loving to hate now. So it's sort of switched gears a little bit here.
So he gets to feel what it's like to be the victim every once in a while?
Yes, and he does. And it's tough on him because, now he's had to think about how he treated the first two wives, doesn't understand why Charlotte does the things she does, why she says the things she says. And so it's a little bit difficult for him. Because
I saw that with Alicia and that she cheated on Philip.
Yes.
And that she will not accept infidelity from her husband.
Ever. Yeah, no, she won't.
And that shows kind of a lack of compassion.
And it does, certainly a double standard. And, but that's it, people want to have their cake and eat it too all the time. And she's just no different.
Well, I think that's my problem, is just too much cake. So how long usually does it take you to put a book together, from the beginning of the draft to turning in the final version?
Well, when I'm doing the outline, that can take me 2-3 weeks. That's not as hard because, of course, it changes once I actually start writing the book anyway, but that gives me a good idea of where I'm going with it. When I start writing the chapters, I try to write, definitely I don't write less than a chapter. I won't stop unless I've finished a complete chapter. That's just always been my goal and my rule for myself, so to speak. But usually a couple of chapters a day with the first draft, and I keep doing that until I'm finished with it. That could take a month to 6 weeks, really just getting that down. But as I said, I'm doing that every day, all day. I usually don't travel during that period of time. I don't do any events during that period of time. Then I go back and have to do the rewrites and the edits, and that's another 6 to 8 weeks. So probably a good 3 months if you were to add all of the days up together. Of course, there's some days that I do miss when I have other things going on, but about 3 months total.
When you're not on tour and when you're not in writing mode, how do you just spend your time?
Usually I'm at home. A lot of times, people will think, can't wait to get away on vacation, and that's most people's dreams. That's not mine. Mine is to be at home, with my husband. The doorbell's not ringing. Nobody's really calling, but home is my favorite place to be. That's where I really get the most of my enjoyment. And it probably is because I travel so much throughout the year.
When you've been writing, do you ever surprise yourself on some of the things that you come up with?
And I do, and sometimes even still today, and I thought that would change as the years pass, I will read back in a book that, say, I wrote 2 years ago, and I'll read a line and I'll think, wow, they must have changed something because I don't remember writing that. And then I'll go look at my draft. Literally, I will stop and go look at a draft on my computer, and the words will be exact. And so you're kind of in a totally different zone when you're writing. You're really in another world. And so when I'm out of that, you move on and you really do forget. I actually wrote that line, and it's hard to believe.
Well, Kimberla, I want to thank you so much for stopping by and sharing your book with us today.
Thank you
It's been a
so
pleasure.
much. Thank you for having me.
Be Careful What You Wish For by Kimberla Lawson Roby is available from William Morrow. I'm Stephen Usery, and this is Book Talk.
Watching the Library Channel, a broadcast service of the Memphis Public Libraries and the City of Memphis.